RWBY just dropped a new episode for Volume 9, giving us a lot of little answers, but raising even more questions. So today, we're going to talk about Alyx, the tree, how Jaune aged, and why the RWBY gang may have to sacrifice one of their own in order to return to Remnant. My name is Deepcut, hit that subscribe button, and let's jump on in. The previous episode ended with Jaune revealing himself as the Rusted Knight, a character from the fairy tale called The Girl Who Fell Through the World, one of the many popular fairy tales in Remnant that detail a young girl named Alyx coming to the land of Ever After. Jaune was revealed to be the Rusted Knight, but that he had aged considerably since the last time we'd seen the girls. Now, in my previous video, we theorized a lot of complicated ways that this may have happened, but the simple answer to it is actually that Jaune just picked up some time-themed fruit, and then time got a little fruity, and he found himself in the past of Ever After. The girls had fallen into Remnant before Jaune, something he knew as he found Ruby's weapon washed up on shore, so when he traveled back in time, he knew that if he waited long enough, the girls would fall into Ever After and he'd be able to meet them again. However, Jaune revealed that it was actually Alyx and her brother who fell through Remnant first. The Rusted Knight was a character in the fairy tale about Alyx, so Jaune himself actually managed to become that character through his fruity time travel shenanigans. This revelation was doubly interesting because Alyx's brother was not mentioned in the book about the girl who fell through the world. In Volume 8, Oscar and Ozpin discussed this story, with Oscar saying he didn't understand why the main character Alyx would come back so sad. According to Jaune, the story of Alyx, presumably written by her, is wildly different than what actually happened with him. Alyx is described by Jaune as essentially a bad person. Jaune felt like it was his job to make sure the story ended the same way it did in the book he had read growing up, but it had become clear that the story Alyx wrote was just a series of lies loosely based on her real experience there, perhaps more based on what Jaune told her about the story, allowing her to maintain the timeline by taking that story with her to write into the book. Thus far, the girls have been using it as their guide, with the tree being the way Alyx got home. However, Jaune believes that the only reason she was able to return to Remnant and tell her story was because she chose to abandon her brother and give him to the tree. The tree at the center of Ever After is behind the ascending, as the curious cat calls it, though as discussed in previous videos, this process seems a lot more like a fall for the characters who experience it. Earlier in the volume, we met the Red Prince, for instance, who is said to be the outcome of the Red King after ascending, somehow stepping down in rank. This process was used by the caterpillar as well, though we only saw him get taken away and not returned yet. Jaune describes this as feeding the tree, and that all these beings really exist to maintain some sort of balance for the tree itself to exist, cycling through the beings and consuming them in some way so they'd come back lesser and lesser. To return home, Jaune implies you have to be willing to give the tree at least one person, with Alyx giving her brother as sacrifice to the tree so she could return. This moment could be what made Alyx come back sad after falling through the world, though Jaune also explains that Alyx changed radically when she met the caterpillar. It was through the caterpillar that the RWBY girls all met their other selves, which in many ways felt like they were about to be offered the option of ascension as well. The curious cat's role in all of this seems to be helping the tree, making sure people play their roles or they get ascended. This seems to be setting up the idea that one of the RWBY gang will be left behind, which after the events of the time-traveling fruit would make Jaune the obvious choice. This would have Jaune parallel the role of the White Knight in the Alice Through the Looking Glass book, which a lot of the Ever After lore is based off of. In the book, the knight has to stay behind, and Alyx has to continue her journey on her own despite the help that he was able to give her. However, I don't think this will actually end up having to happen. Instead, I imagine that by the end of the volume, the exact rules will either allow for someone like Neapolitan to be used as their sacrifice, or for the truth of Lewis to be revealed as not having been sacrificed at all. Along the way, I imagine that Jaune will find a way to de-age himself as well. Holding the clock allowed him to stay the same age as time moved, and perhaps some other fruit will have an effect of returning him to the proper age. However, like Alyx, I imagine that he will come back permanently changed in a way, at least internally. Weiss and Jaune have slowly been teased as maybe having a romantic pairing, but one thing that has always held Jaune back is that he is something of a late bloomer. Earlier in this volume, Weiss expressed attraction to the hypothetical Rusted Knight when she talked about how he would make a better companion than the curious cat. She later saw the Rusted Knight was not just Jaune, but as his older self, and described him as mature with a flirtatious tone, for which he was given looks from the other girls. What we are seeing here isn't just Jaune being a little older than before, but really more rugged from his experiences. He now has a seriousness to him that a long time alone is able to give him that fighting monsters could not. It was never about his physical prowess or how seriously he takes the world, but how seriously he takes himself, and that only comes after a long time of introspection and dedicating yourself to something. By the end of the volume, I think Jaune will do some fruity time shenanigans to revert to his natural age, but he will retain that sense of self. He'll be a little more lighthearted in his youthful body again, but he will come back different. Not worse or broken, just more serious, and someone that Weiss could perhaps finally see herself being with. While this volume is based largely on the Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass books, it's been using the structure of the Alice stories to draw parallels more so to mythological stories, such as the Garden of Eden narrative. Jaune taking his clock from the tree is very reminiscent of Adam eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, turning him into someone who has now seen through the truth of good and evil through the fairy tale about Alyx and her real self. This likens the tree at the center of Ever After to the tree of knowledge of good and evil itself, with it already being comparable to the mythic tree of Ysigadril as well, which is said to connect the various dimensions of existence. Ever After thus is sort of a Garden of Eden between all worlds, and keeping this tree alive, keeping its existence in balance, is likely part of what's required to keep all of the worlds in existence, including the world of Remnant where the girls come from. All of these various characters appear to be angelic-like beings, or Elohim, or what have you, beings who in some way are spiritually advanced, but mostly exist to serve a purpose in the balance. Many likely had the promise of actually rising higher and higher in the hierarchy of Ever After, just as we can see them falling to their younger states, as with the king turning to a prince. These characters most likely experience a Sisyphus-like existence, however, working to get to higher positions, but constantly being ascended back to a lower form, with the Curious Cat being a mischievous entity that has found it is best for him to simply exist in the balance, doing his job, instead of trying to ascend higher or fall low again. Jaune believes that the tree is dangerous and that Louis had to be left behind for Alyx to return to Remnant, but I think he will give in and ultimately take the girls to the tree himself, thinking he will sacrifice himself, as discussed before. Perhaps there he will meet Louis and we will learn the truth of what really happened to Alyx and what the nature of the tree is. This will itself be the forbidden fruit of knowledge of good and evil that the RWBY girls will consume, not physically or even by picking a fruit off the tree like Jaune did with his clock. But rather, the RWBY gang is going to get information that they aren't ready to deal with, likely linked to their moral place in the grand scheme of things, and they will return to Remnant with a deeper understanding of themselves because of it, and hopefully the knowledge and courage they need to rescue the people of their world and stop Salem. But what do you guys think? Let me know your theories in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time.